Hello, my name is Graham Ellis. I'm 30 years old, and if you ask me about my life, I'd say it's like a book with beautiful chapters interspersed with crumpled pages stained with ink. I grew up in the suburbs of Atlanta, Georgia, in a modest red brick house where neighbors knew each other's names, and the sound of birds chirping every morning was a familiar melody. But don't let that peaceful facade fool you. Inside that house, my family was an emotional labyrinth where love and pressure were so tightly intertwined that sometimes I didn't know where I stood. I'm the eldest child, a role I never asked for but had to shoulder nonetheless. My father, Paul, a retired police officer, is a tall, imposing man with a deep, commanding voice, as if he's always ready to give orders. He's the kind of person you don't want to argue with, not because he's frightening, but because he has a way of making you feel wrong, even when you know you're right. My mother, Heather, is an accountant, still toiling away with numbers in her small office, though her income never seems enough to satisfy her. They love me. I don't doubt that. But their love always came with expectations, invisible strings that tightened around me from a young age. Then there's Dylan, my younger brother, 3 years my junior. Dylan is the sunshine in our parents' eyes, a golden boy with a charming smile and a knack for making people overlook his mistakes. While I slaved away studying and working part-time at a grocery store to afford books, Dylan was handed everything: college tuition, his first car, a shiny red Mustang he drove everywhere, despite never holding a job for more than 6 months. I'm not jealous, not exactly, but every time I heard Mom brag about Dylan's hidden potential or saw Dad pat his shoulder with a proud look, my heart ached, as if I were a faint shadow in my own family. Growing up in suburban Atlanta wasn't a fairy tale. Our house sat on a quiet street with a front yard full of weeds and an old oak tree I'd climb to escape the arguments in the kitchen below. My parents didn't fight often, but when they did, it felt like the world was shaking. It was usually about money, always about money. Dad retired early due to health issues, and his pension barely covered the basics. Mom worked herself to exhaustion but never complained, only sighing quietly as she reviewed bills. I learned to read their moods through small signs, the way Mom tapped her pen on the table when anxious, or Dad's distant gaze as he sat in his armchair staring out the window. I realized early on that if I wanted to break free from that cycle, I had to rely on myself. In high school, I worked at a pizza shop, standing behind the counter for hours to earn money for books and college application fees. I won a scholarship to the University of Georgia, and for the first time I felt I'd done something truly worth being proud of. But even that moment was overshadowed. When I showed my parents the scholarship acceptance letter, Mom gave a faint smile and said, "Good job, Graham, but don't let it make you arrogant." Meanwhile, Dylan, who had just been kicked off the football team for skipping practice, was comforted by Dad with a special dinner. I remember standing in the kitchen staring at the steak Mom prepared for Dylan, wondering if I'd ever be loved like that. The favoritism wasn't something I imagined. It was there in every small detail. When I needed money for a laptop for school, my parents told me to figure it out myself. But when Dylan crashed his car while driving drunk, they immediately dipped into their savings to fix it. I learned not to ask, not to depend. I told myself I was stronger for it, that I didn't need their favoritism to succeed. But deep down, I always longed for them to look at me with the same pride they gave Dylan. At 22, after graduating with a marketing degree, I decided to leave Atlanta. I wanted to escape my family's shadow, the unfair comparisons, and the invisible pressures. Chicago was my destination, a big, bustling city where I could start fresh. I remember the day I left, standing at Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, suitcase in hand, heart pounding with both excitement and fear. Mom hugged me, whispering, "Call home often, Graham." Dad just nodded and said, "Don't get into trouble." Dylan didn't even see me off. He was too busy sleeping off a night of partying. Chicago was a breath of fresh air. I started with an internship at a cosmetics company where I quickly proved myself. I loved my job. The advertising campaigns, the lively brainstorming sessions, the feeling that I was creating something valuable. After 5 years, I was promoted to marketing manager with a salary that allowed me to live comfortably and even save a decent amount. I rented a small apartment downtown with windows overlooking Chicago's skyline, and for the first time I felt like I truly belonged somewhere. Meanwhile, Dylan stayed in Atlanta, still mooching off our parents. He changed jobs like he changed clothes, from salesman to freelance DJ, then unemployed again. He married Katie, a girl with a radiant smile but a lavish lifestyle that matched Dylan's. They quickly drowned in debt, credit cards, bank loans, even loan sharks. Instead of letting Dylan face the consequences, my parents kept bailing him out, dipping into their retirement savings to pay his debts. I learned this through rare calls from Mom when she'd lament Dylan's tough situation but never ask how I was doing. I tried to keep my distance from the family, not because I didn't love them, but because every conversation pulled me back to the past, to days when I felt not good enough, not worthy enough. I called home once a month, mainly to check on my parents. Those calls were always brief, filled with awkward silences. Mom would talk about Dylan, how he'd just lost another job, or how Katie wanted to open a nail salon but lacked funds. Dad would ask if I could send money home because the family's struggling. I started sending $1,500 a month, not because I wanted to, but because it felt like the only way to keep the peace. But deep down, I knew that peace was an illusion. Every time I sent money, Mom thanked me cursorily as if it were my duty. Dylan never mentioned the money, but I heard from Mom that he used it to buy new clothes or go on trips with Katie. I wondered if they ever thought about what I sacrificed to earn that money. The late nights working, the times I skipped outings with friends to save, the dreams I put on hold to stay stable. Then one day the phone rang. It was Mom, her voice tense, different from usual. "Graham, you need to come home," she said. "We have something important to discuss. It's a family matter." A chill ran down my spine. I knew this call wasn't just a casual invitation to visit. Something was waiting for me in Atlanta, something that would change everything. I booked a flight, my heart heavy, unsure of what I was about to face, but I knew, whatever it was, it wouldn't be easy. Sitting on the flight from Chicago to Atlanta, I stared out the window, watching fluffy white clouds drift by like fragments of shattered memories. I tried to imagine the important family meeting Mom had mentioned, but my mind was filled with questions that had no answers. The last time I'd been to Atlanta was for Christmas, a brief visit filled with awkward conversations and perfunctory hugs. Dylan had bragged about a new business plan, some vague idea about opening a bar, while Mom looked at him with sparkling eyes, as if he'd just invented electricity. I just sat there, sipping cold coffee, trying to keep the bitterness in my heart from spilling over. When the plane landed at Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, the humid Georgia heat enveloped me, like an unwanted embrace. I rented a car and drove to the familiar red brick house in the suburbs. The old oak tree still stood in the front yard, but it looked more withered now, as if time had worn away some of my childhood memories. As I stepped inside, the smell of Mom's baking cookies lingered in the air, but there was no warmth to accompany it. Dad sat in his armchair, his eyes fixed on me with a stern expression. Mom stood in the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron, her lips pressed into a thin line. Dylan and Katie sat on the sofa, hands clasped, but their eyes avoided mine. The air in the room was heavy, as if everyone were bracing for a storm. "Graham, sit down," Dad said, his voice low but carrying an unmistakable urgency. I pulled out a chair, my heart pounding. Mom placed a glass of water in front of me but didn't meet my eyes. Dylan fidgeted as if he wanted to bolt. Katie offered a forced smile, but her eyes were sharp, sizing me up. "We need to talk about Dylan," Mom began, her voice trembling but resolute. "You know your brother's been struggling. He and Katie. They need a fresh start." I nodded, trying to stay calm, but a storm was already brewing inside me. "What kind of struggle?" I asked, though I could guess the answer. "Dylan was always struggling," A failed job, a new debt, a plan that never materialized. Dad cleared his throat, leaning forward. We've decided to help Dylan and Katie. We bought them a house, a nice one in a good area so they can settle down. I blinked, trying to process the words. Bought a house? I repeated, my voice higher than intended. With what money? Mom glanced at Dad, then back at me, choosing her words carefully. We used our savings and took out a mortgage. The house is worth $400,000, but the remaining loan is $320,000, and we need your help. My heart seemed to stop. Help? What do you mean? Dad's voice hardened. We need you to take on the mortgage payments. You have a good job, a steady income. Dylan and Katie can't manage it, but you can. Family helps family, Graham. Blood rushed to my head, a mix of anger and disbelief. I looked at Dylan, hoping he'd say something, an explanation, an apology, anything. But he just stared at his hands, picking at his nails. Katie gripped his hand tightly, as if shielding him from me. Dad, Mom, I've been sending $1,500 a month, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady, my hands clenched under the table. I've covered living expenses, utility bills, even Dad's medication. Now you want me to pay off a $320,000 mortgage for a house I didn't choose, don't live in, and wasn't even consulted about? Mom frowned, as if I'd said something offensive. Graham, you're the eldest. You have a responsibility to your brother. Dylan needs this chance. If you don't help, they'll lose everything. They've already had everything, I snapped, unable to hold back. You paid for Dylan's college, bought him a car, paid off his debts. And me? I did everything on my own. I worked part-time from age 16, paid for my own school, built my life in Chicago. And now you want me to ruin my financial plans to bail out Dylan, who's never taken responsibility for anything? The living room fell silent. Dylan finally looked up, his eyes flashing with anger. You talk like I'm a burden, he said, his voice shaking. I'm trying, Graham. I don't have the luck you do. Luck? I almost laughed, but the sound caught in my throat. I worked myself to exhaustion to get where I am, and you? You spend money like water, married someone just as extravagant, and now you want me to pay for your choices? Enough! Dad slammed his hand on the table, making my glass of water tremble. Graham, you're being selfish. Family means sacrifice. You can't just think about yourself. His words cut like a knife. I looked at Mom, hoping she'd say something to ease the tension, but she just nodded in agreement with Dad. Katie started crying, tears I wasn't sure were genuine or just for show. Dylan wrapped his arms around her, whispering something as if I were the villain in this story. I took a deep breath, trying to regain my composure. Dad, Mom, I understand family is important, but I've done everything I can. If Dylan and Katie need a house, why not rent or buy something cheaper? There are other options. Asking me to pay for a $320,000 loan is unfair. I can't do it. I can't afford it. Can't afford it? Mom nearly shouted. You make good money in Chicago. You live alone, no family, no responsibilities. You could do it if you wanted to. It felt like a slap in the face. No family? No responsibilities? I repeated, my voice trembling with anger and pain. I've sent money home every month. I've done everything you've asked, even when it meant sacrificing my own plans. But I'm not a bank. I have a life, dreams, plans. Dad stood, pointing at me. You're turning your back on family, Graham. If you don't help, don't expect us to consider you part of this family anymore. Those words were the final blow. I stood, my legs shaking, but I knew I couldn't give in. If family means I have to give up everything for Dylan, then maybe I don't understand what family is, I said, my voice cold but my heart breaking. I walked out of the house, not looking back, the sound of Katie's sobs and Dad's voice echoing behind me like a song I didn't want to hear. On the flight back to Chicago, I sat huddled in my seat, my mind reeling. I'd refused my parents' request, but why did I feel like the one in the wrong? I stared out the window, the city lights twinkling below like lost stars. I wondered if I could ever repair my relationship with my family or if this was the end. But deep down, I knew my decision was right. I couldn't live to atone for Dylan's mistakes, couldn't sacrifice my future just to keep the peace with a family that never truly saw me. As the plane landed, I received a text from Mom. "You've disappointed us, Graham. Think again." I gripped my phone, my fingers hovering over the screen, but I didn't reply. I didn't know what to say. But I knew this fight wasn't over. A part of me feared what would come next, and that instinct wasn't wrong. My family wouldn't stop here. They'd find a way to pressure me, no matter the cost. The days following my return from Atlanta felt like living in a nightmare with no escape. Each morning I woke up and checked my phone, expecting a text or call from Mom, Dad, or even Dylan, but there was only silence. That silence was more terrifying than any accusation. It was like a dagger slowly piercing my heart, making me question whether I'd been wrong to refuse them. I tried to focus on work, advertising campaigns, tense meetings. But my mind kept drifting back to the red brick house, to Mom's disappointed eyes and Dad's cold voice. Then one afternoon, as I left the office, my phone buzzed. It wasn't Mom or Dad, but an unfamiliar number. I frowned, hesitated, then answered. "Graham Ellis?" a man's voice said, polite but firm. "This is Carter and Associates, a law firm. We represent your parents, Paul and Heather Ellis. Can you make time to receive some legal documents?" I froze on the Chicago sidewalk, people rushing past, but it felt like the world had stopped. "Legal documents?" I repeated, my voice hoarse. "About what?" "We'll send details via email, but it concerns a financial commitment. You should review them soon," the man said, hanging up before I could ask more. I got back to my apartment, heart pounding. When I opened the email, I found dozens of pages with a chilling title: "Lawsuit against Graham Ellis for breach of financial commitment." I read in disbelief. My parents, the people who raised me, were suing me. They claimed I'd promised to cover the $320,000 mortgage for Dylan and Katie's house, but then betrayed that promise, causing severe financial harm to the family. The lawsuit listed the $1,500 I sent monthly as evidence that I had the means and responsibility to pay Dylan's debt. I sank onto the couch, hands trembling. Promised? I'd never promised to pay that mortgage. The conversation in Atlanta was a request, no, a demand that I'd refused. How could they twist it into a legal promise? Each line of the lawsuit felt like a cut to my pride. They called me selfish, said I'd turned my back on family duty. They even fabricated a story that I'd verbally agreed during the family meeting in front of Dylan and Katie. I called Mom immediately, but she didn't answer. I tried Dad, then Dylan. No one picked up. Finally, I texted Mom. "How could you do this? I never promised to pay for Dylan's house. Why are you suing me?" The message sent, but no reply came. I felt betrayed, as if the family I'd tried so hard to hold together had crumbled beneath me. The next morning, I contacted a lawyer in Chicago named Rachel, recommended by a colleague. Rachel was a petite but sharp woman with eyes that seemed to see through everything. As I told her my story, she listened intently, jotting notes in a notebook. "Graham," she said, her voice calm but firm, "this lawsuit is driven by emotion, not law. They have no clear evidence of a legal agreement. But we need to prepare thoroughly because your family seems very determined." Rachel asked for every text, email, and financial transaction between me and my family. I dug through old messages, Mom's curt thank yous for the money I sent, her updates about Dylan's struggles. Not one mentioned me agreeing to the mortgage. Rachel nodded as she reviewed them. "Good," she said. "They have nothing concrete, but you need to stay calm. This case could get personal and emotionally challenging." She was right. The following weeks were a whirlwind of anxiety and anger. I couldn't sleep, lying awake at night, wondering how things had come to this. What had I done wrong? I'd done everything to support my family, even when it meant shelving my own dreams, like buying a bigger apartment or taking that European trip I'd always wanted. Now the family I loved most was dragging me to court like a criminal. The court date arrived faster than I expected. The Atlanta courthouse was a cold building with marble hallways and a stifling atmosphere. As I entered the courtroom, I saw my parents on the other side with their lawyer, a smug middle-aged man. Dylan and Katie were there too, but they wouldn't look at me. Mom wore a gray sweater, looking older than her years, her eyes red but resolute. Dad sat upright as if he believed he was doing something righteous. The judge, an older woman with a calm voice, asked my parents' lawyer to present their case. He stood, spinning a tale woven from distorted memories. He claimed I'd promised to pay the mortgage during the family meeting, that I'd committed in front of everyone but then betrayed the family out of personal selfishness. He presented copies of my bank transfers, arguing they proved I could afford the debt. Rachel stood to counter, her voice sharp but composed. She presented my texts and emails, pointing out there was no evidence of a promise. "Your Honor," she said, "my client, Graham Ellis, has supported his family by sending $1,500 monthly for years, despite no legal obligation to do so. But there was no agreement, written or verbal, for him to cover a $320,000 mortgage. This is a family expectation, not a legal contract." The judge nodded, jotting notes. Then she turned to my parents. "Mr. and Mrs. Ellis, do you have concrete evidence of Graham's promise? An email, a text, or a reliable witness?" Dad cleared his throat, his voice shaky. "We don't have anything in writing, Your Honor. But Graham's the eldest son, he knows his responsibilities. He said he'd consider it, and we took that as a promise." Rachel jumped in. "Your Honor, considering is not a legal commitment. My client clearly refused this request, and he had every right to." I looked at my parents, hoping they'd meet my eyes, but they didn't. Mom bowed her head, wiping tears. Dad clenched his fists as if holding back anger. Dylan and Katie sat silently, but I caught Dylan's accusatory glance when he finally looked my way. I wanted to scream, to ask why they were doing this, why they'd made me the enemy. But I sat there, letting Rachel speak for me. Finally, the judge spoke. "I've reviewed the documents and heard both sides. There's no evidence that Graham Ellis committed to paying the mortgage. Family expectations, while significant, are not a legal contract. This case is dismissed." I exhaled, but no sense of victory came. Instead, I felt hollow. As the hearing ended, my parents stood and left without a word. Dylan and Katie followed, but I heard Katie whisper something to Dylan, her voice laced with anger. Rachel patted my shoulder, saying, "You did the right thing, Graham. They had no legal ground. Now you can move on with your life." But move on how? As I left the courthouse, Atlanta's bright sunlight didn't warm me. I'd won the lawsuit, but I'd lost my family. A new wound had opened in my heart, and I knew it wouldn't heal easily. I got in the car, drove to the airport, and wondered if my family would ever forgive me, or if I could forgive them. On the flight back to Chicago, I sat hunched in my seat, the hum of the plane's engines drowned out by the echo of Dad's words. "Don't expect us to consider you family anymore." Those words stabbed deep into my chest, each memory of them a fresh jolt of pain. I stared out the window, clouds drifting hazily by like my uncertain future. Family, the one thing I'd thought was my safest haven, was now just a shattered memory. I knew I'd done the right thing, but why did victory taste so bitter? Back in my Chicago apartment, I felt like a stranger in my own home. The small space with its window overlooking the city skyline, once my pride, now only deepened my loneliness. I checked my phone, hoping for a text, a call, any sign that my parents or Dylan still saw me as family. Nothing. Only a notification from my banking app. The joint account I'd used to send money to my parents had been locked. Mom had cut my access, as if erasing every trace of me from their lives. They didn't want a single cent from me anymore. Then came another notification, a social media post from Dylan. I hesitated, but curiosity won. I opened it and instantly regretted it. It was a long, venomous rant. Dylan called me selfish, a family traitor, someone who abandoned his brother in need. He wrote that I'd chosen money over kinship, that I didn't deserve to be the eldest. The post had dozens of comments from distant relatives I barely knew, agreeing with Dylan and hurling insults I couldn't bear to repeat. An aunt wrote, "Graham, you're a disgrace." An uncle added, "He thinks he's better than the family." I shut off my phone, but the words had already seared into my mind. I sank to the floor, knees drawn up, fighting back tears. I wasn't crying over the accusations. I was used to being misunderstood. But I cried for the loss, for the reality that the family I'd loved and sacrificed for now saw me as an enemy. I wondered if I'd been wrong from the start. Should I have agreed to pay the mortgage even if it meant ruining my own life? Guilt choked me, mingling with anger and hurt. I wanted to scream, to call Mom and demand why, but I knew no answer would satisfy me. The days that followed, I lived like a shadow. I went to work, attended meetings, smiled at colleagues, but it was all a facade. At night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling a black hole in my chest, swallowing every trace of joy. Insomnia took hold. I'd wake at 3 a.m., heart racing, drenched in cold sweat. Childhood memories flooded back. Times I stood on the sidelines watching Dylan bask in our parents' affection. Moments I told myself I had to be stronger, better, to be loved. Now I realized that no matter how hard I tried, I was never enough in their eyes. One evening, sitting in my darkened apartment, my phone buzzed. It was Grandma Monica, the only family member still speaking to me after the lawsuit. She lived in Savannah, a few hours' drive from Atlanta, and had always understood me best. "Graham, are you okay?" she asked, her voice warm but worried. I poured out everything, the lawsuit, Dylan's post, how my parents had disowned me. She listened silently, then said, "I know what it's like to be pressured by family. Your father once asked me to use my savings to help him, but I refused. Now you're walking my path. Don't let them make you doubt yourself." Her words were a small light in the darkness, but not enough to dispel the storm in my heart. I knew I needed help. So I reached out to Dr. Patricia, a therapist recommended by a colleague. At our first session, I sat in her small office's armchair, feeling like a lost child. Patricia, with her silver hair and gentle eyes, didn't let me hide from my emotions. "Graham," she said, "tell me what you feel. Not what you think you should feel, but what's really going on inside." I told her everything, the hurt, the guilt, the isolation. I spoke of growing up in Dylan's shadow, always striving to prove my worth but never measuring up. Patricia listened without judgment, and when I finished, she said, "You're carrying a burden that isn't yours. Your family placed unfair expectations on you, and when you set boundaries, they punished you. But boundaries aren't selfish. They're how you protect yourself." Therapy with Patricia became my anchor. She helped me revisit childhood wounds, times I was compared, overlooked, or seen as the strong one who didn't need love. I began to understand that my guilt wasn't because I'd done wrong, but because I'd been taught that loving family meant sacrificing myself. Patricia said otherwise. "Love shouldn't demand you give up who you are, Graham. You deserve to be loved without a price." Healing wasn't easy. Some days I woke up empty, as if a part of me was gone. I tried to find joy in work, but even successful ad campaigns felt hollow. I avoided social media as every scroll brought new comments from distant relatives echoing Dylan's post. Once I saw a message from Mom, but it wasn't an apology. "We don't need your money anymore," she wrote. "Take care of yourself." Those words were a final knife, severing the last shred of hope I held. But in the darkness, I found small glimmers of light. Lucas, my college friend, noticed I was drowning. One night, he showed up at my apartment with pizza and a beer. "Graham, you don't have to do this alone," he said. We talked late into the night, and for the first time in weeks, I laughed genuinely. Lucas didn't try to fix me, but his presence reminded me I wasn't entirely alone. My co-workers became part of a chosen family I slowly built. They didn't know the full story, but they sensed I was struggling. One afternoon, Jennifer, a colleague from the marketing team, invited me for coffee after work. She didn't ask about my family, just talked about light things. Movies, music, weekend plans. I felt lighter around her, as if she didn't expect me to prove anything. These small steps, sessions with Patricia, late-night talks with Lucas, quiet moments with Jennifer, began mending the cracks in my heart. I still hurt, still missed my family, but I started accepting that they might never understand me. And maybe I didn't need their approval to keep living. I'd won the lawsuit, but more importantly, I was learning to reclaim myself. One day, one small step at a time. Jennifer became an unexpected light in my life. She wasn't flashy or trying to impress, but there was a sincerity in the way she talked, laughed, and listened without judgment. Our after-work coffees turned into evening walks along the Chicago River, where the city lights reflected on the water like fallen stars. I started opening up to her, not the full story about my family, as I wasn't ready, but enough for her to know I carried wounds that wouldn't easily heal. She didn't push me to share more, just gently said, "When you're ready to talk, I'll be here." Our relationship grew naturally, as if it was meant to be. Jennifer had a way of making me feel seen, not as the eldest son who had to carry everything, but as me, Graham, with my dreams, fears, and bad days. She told me about her own family, how she'd struggled to set boundaries with her alcoholic father. "Sometimes loving means letting go," she said one night as we sat in a small diner, a candle flickering between us. Her words were like a key unlocking a part of my heart I'd kept tightly shut. After a year of dating, I couldn't imagine life without her. One autumn evening, as golden leaves blanketed Chicago's streets, I knelt by the riverbank, my hands trembling as I held a ring I'd saved for all year. "Jennifer, will you be my partner no matter how tough life gets?" I asked, my voice thick with nerves. She smiled, tears shimmering in her eyes, and nodded. "You're such a goof, Graham. Of course I will." Planning the wedding was an emotional journey. I wanted a small ceremony, just the people who truly mattered, Lucas, a few close colleagues, and I hoped my family. Despite everything, I sent invitations to my parents and Dylan. I included a short letter, not too long, just enough to say I held no grudges and wanted them at my big day. I also sent one to Grandma Monica in Savannah, who called back immediately, her voice brimming with excitement. "Graham, I'll be there. You deserve to be happy." The wedding day arrived, with Chicago's sky clear and sunlight streaming softly through the small restaurant's stained glass windows. Jennifer was radiant in a simple white dress, her hair loose, her eyes looking at me like I was her whole world. Lucas, my best man, kept teasing me for shaking while reading my vows, but as I scanned the crowd, my heart sank. My parents weren't there. Neither were Dylan and Katie. Their seats sat empty, a painful reminder of the chasm between us. Only Grandma Monica was in the front row, her eyes sparkling with pride, a neatly folded handkerchief in her hand like a talisman. After the ceremony, Grandma pulled me aside, hugging me tightly. "You're my pride, Graham," she said, her voice choked. "I know you've been through so much pain, but today, you chose right. You chose your happiness." I thanked her, but couldn't help asking about my family. I needed to know how they were, even if part of me dreaded the answer. Grandma sighed, sitting beside me. "Your parents are struggling, Graham. The house they bought for Dylan, they couldn't keep up with the mortgage. They had to sell it at a huge loss. Your dad, Paul, is working part-time at an auto shop to make ends meet. Dylan and Katie moved back in with them. They're still spending recklessly, still relying on your parents and showing no signs of change." A pang shot through my chest. Despite their hurt, I couldn't help but worry. "Grandma, should I do something? I could send money again, even if the joint account's locked." She took my hand, her eyes firm but kind. "Graham, listen to me. You've done more than enough. They chose their path, and you can't save them from those choices. If you keep trying, they'll keep taking advantage of you like they have for years. You have a new family now, Jennifer, your friends, and me. Live for yourself." Jennifer, standing nearby, overheard. She stepped closer, resting a hand on my shoulder. "Graham, she said, her voice gentle but steady. "I know you love your family, but love doesn't mean letting them drag you down. You deserve to live without apologizing for setting boundaries." Their words were an anchor, grounding me as I felt the familiar pull of guilt. I nodded, though my heart remained heavy. I knew they were right, but letting go of family, even those who'd hurt me, wasn't easy. It was a process, as Patricia had said, and I was still learning to walk that path. The wedding continued with laughter and music, but I couldn't deny the void left by my parents and Dylan's absence. Yet watching Jennifer dance with Lucas, seeing Grandma clap to the music, I realized I hadn't entirely lost family. I was building a new one, a chosen family where I was loved for me, not for what I could give. In the months after the wedding, Jennifer and I started our life together. We moved into a bigger apartment with a small workspace for me and a balcony where Jennifer grew tiny, vibrant plants. My career kept climbing. I was promoted to marketing director, a milestone I hadn't dared dream of years ago. But the greatest joy came from simple moments with Jennifer. Cooking together, watching movies on Saturday nights, or sitting on the balcony as she shared her dream of opening a small flower shop. Patricia remained my guide in healing. During one session, I admitted my mixed feelings about my family's struggles. "I want to help, but I'm scared of being pulled back into that cycle," I confessed. She smiled as if she'd been waiting for this. "Graham, it's normal to worry about them, that's love. But love doesn't mean sacrificing yourself. Let them face the consequences of their choices. You did the right thing protecting your future." Her words, alongside Jennifer's and Grandma's support, strengthened my resolve. I started writing letters to my parents, not to send, but to release the emotions I'd bottled up. In them, I wrote about my pain, the hurt of being disowned, but also my hope that one day we might reconcile. I didn't know if that day would come, but writing brought relief, like letting go of painful memories piece by piece. My life now is a new canvas, painted with brighter colors. I still miss my family, still ache when I think of them, but I no longer let that pain define me. With Jennifer by my side, with Lucas and Grandma cheering me on, I'm learning to love myself, not as the eldest son who must sacrifice, but as a man who deserves his own happiness.